Welcome to VidDevo Bible. 7 minutes in the Word of God. Genesis chapter 1, verse 24. And God said, "Let the earth bring forth the living creature after his kind, cattle and creeping thing, and beasts of the earth after his kind." And it was so. And God said, "Let the earth bring forth the living creature after his kind, cattle and creeping thing, and beasts of the earth after his kind." And it was so. God didn't do, God said. And as God has said, we listen and we hear what he has said to us. We understand by what he has spoken to us. We read in Genesis chapter 1 what God has said. And God has said in verse 24, "Let the earth bring forth the living creature after his kind, cattle and creeping thing, and beasts of the earth after his kind," and it was so. What God said became so. And it's interesting that we can accept what God has said, or we can reject what God has said and try to change what God has said. But it doesn't change or rearrange the fact that God said it. And what God has said we have recorded for us. And what God has recorded for us is that which has been passed down from generation to generation and will be kept forever, from everlasting to everlasting. Because God has said in Genesis 1 of verse 24, "Let the earth bring forth the living creature after his kind, cattle and creeping thing, and beasts of the earth after his kind," and it was so. Apologetically, people argue. Theologically, people debate. Intellectually, people question. Wonderment of mine is that why would we question, debate, or argue about something that's so obviously stated for us that is meant to be accepted rather than rejected? Why do we try to analyze or change or reapply something that God has spoken and said and is true? This is the answer to everything you do when you question about what God has said in Genesis, in chapter 1 of verse 24. And God said, "Let the earth bring forth the living creature after his kind, cattle and creeping thing, and beasts of the earth after his kind," and it was so. God spoke. People heard. Someone somewhere recorded it at some point in time for us to know what God said. There's no question as to whether or not God said it. It is absolute. It is reported for us. It is stated here that God said, and it was so. Because it was so, I know that God said it. Because oftentimes when man says something or takes from the Word of God, it's not so. When man argues about the Word of God, it's not so. When people start to tell me about what they think about the Word of God, it's not so. But when God speaks, it is so. And God had spoken to us in Genesis chapter 1, verse 24, when he said, let the earth bring forth the living creature after his kind, cattle and creeping thing, and beasts of the earth after his kind. And it was so. No doubt for anyone to argue, debate, or question creationism versus evolution. Neither one, because it's not about creationism and it's not about evolution. It is about what God has said, and it was so. That is what it is. That's not creationism. That's reality and fact. So the truth is, in VidDevo Bible, we always read and answer according to what God has said because it is so. We don't take from the Word of God. We don't add to the Word of God. We don't rearrange the Word of God. We don't go into some strange language about the Word of God. We don't need to. Why would you want to understand something you don't understand or comprehend any more than what God has said for you to understand? And God has spoken to us in His Word, by His Word, stating in Genesis chapter 1 of verse 24, "And God said, let the earth bring forth the living creature after his kind, cattle and creeping thing, and beasts of the earth after his kind," and it was so. There isn't anything to qualify, to quantify, or to change or rearrange. There isn't anything necessary that we're missing out on. There's not anything extra to be added to. It's not necessary to go into the Hebrew. You don't have to learn Greek. A little child can understand what God has said, but can adults? Because if you can understand what God has said and how it was so, then you know that the truth has been spoken to you and that you have heard in your hearing that God has said in Genesis chapter 1 of verse 24, let the earth bring forth the living creature after his kind, cattle and creeping thing and beasts of the earth after his kind, and it was so. God said it, it was so. The earth brought forth the living creature. The earth brought forth living creatures after his kind, and cattle, and creeping thing, and beasts of the earth after his kind. And it was so because God said it. That is what the Word of God is. God speaking, and it was so. That's why there is no reason to apologize for God. Why would you? God said it, and it was so. So when you find yourself in listening to people get into weird ideas, weird theologies, weird perspectives, trying to compromise here and complement there, to make it fit here, to make it work there, they're not reading what God has said. We change to fit what God has said. God doesn't change to fit what we want. We listen to what God spoke and said to us. And God has said to us in Genesis chapter 1 of verse 24, and God said, let the earth bring forth the living creature after his kind, cattle and creeping thing and beasts of the earth after his kind. And it was so. Even as you've heard it in VidDevoBible, the Word of God, 7 minutes in the Word of God.